Your daughter-in-law is outside with 2 men and a truck. The neighbor whispered over the phone at 5:02 a.m., and Evelyn Harper did not ask what they were doing there, because she already knew it wasn't anything good. The call had sliced through the quiet of her bedroom before sunrise, the digital clock glowing a cold blue in the darkness as she reached for the phone on her nightstand. At 72, Evelyn did not wake easily anymore, but once she was awake, she was fully awake. She listened without interrupting as Mrs. Caldwell from next door explained that a white cargo van had pulled up in front of the house 10 minutes earlier, that her daughter-in-law Jessica was standing in the driveway with 2 unfamiliar men, and that one of them appeared to be examining the front door as if measuring it. Evelyn thanked her neighbor calmly, set the phone down, and sat on the edge of her bed for a full 5 seconds before standing. The house was still. The same colonial Daniel had grown up in, the same one she and her late husband Thomas had paid off 15 years ago, every mortgage statement carefully filed in a drawer downstairs. She slipped into her robe and cardigan, her movements steady, and walked to the front window without turning on any lights. The streetlights cast long pale shadows across the lawn. There it was. The van. The figures. Jessica's silhouette unmistakable, even at that hour, her posture straight, arms crossed, hair pulled back as if she were there on official business. One of the men bent near the lock, not forcing it, just studying it. That detail mattered. Evelyn did not gasp. She did not rush. Instead, she went to the hall closet, took her coat, and slipped her feet into sensible leather shoes. For months, small things had been adding up. Jessica asking casually about the deed. Daniel mentioning how big the house felt for one person. A brochure for a senior living community left on the kitchen counter as if by accident. Evelyn had said nothing then. She had simply watched. She opened the front door herself before anyone could knock. The early morning air was sharp, about 43 degrees by her guess, the kind of chill that clung to your skin. Jessica turned, surprise flashing across her face for half a second before her smile settled into place. "Evelyn, you're up early," she said, too brightly. The 2 men stepped back politely. They looked like contractors. Clean jackets. Clipboards. Not criminals. Professionals. That detail mattered too. Evelyn looked at the van, then at the clipboard, then at her daughter-in-law. "So are you," she replied evenly. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and then fell silent. The sky was beginning to pale at the edges, the faintest hint of dawn pressing against the dark. It was 5 in the morning, and strangers were standing on her property with measuring tools and paperwork, and her son was nowhere in sight. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She did not ask for explanations. Not yet. She simply stepped fully onto the porch and closed the door behind her, as if to make one thing clear without saying it. This house was still hers. Jessica recovered quickly, smoothing the front of her tailored coat, as if she had been invited there at dawn instead of appearing unannounced. The 2 contractors shifted their weight and exchanged a brief glance, clearly uncomfortable but determined to stay professional. One of them cleared his throat and held up a clipboard with a printed estimate attached to it, something about upgraded locks and a reinforced entry system. Evelyn's eyes moved over the paper without stepping closer. She did not need to read every line to understand the intention. "We thought it would be safer for you," Jessica said in a gentle tone that felt rehearsed, as if concern had been practiced in front of a mirror. "Daniel has been worried about break-ins. You live alone. This neighborhood is changing." Evelyn looked past her daughter-in-law toward the quiet street. The same maple trees lined the sidewalks. The same brick houses stood in neat rows. She had lived on this block for 41 years. She knew which porch lights flickered and which dogs barked at mail trucks. "I was not aware Daniel had scheduled anything," she replied evenly. Jessica's smile tightened. "He meant to tell you. It has been a busy week. We did not want to wake you, but the contractors only had an early slot available." The sky lightened another shade, soft gray replacing deep blue. Evelyn noticed that the van doors were already open. Inside, there were boxes. Not just equipment. Boxes. Brown moving boxes neatly stacked. That detail settled quietly in her mind. "Are you replacing locks?" she asked calmly. "Or planning something else?" The contractor with the clipboard lowered his gaze. Jessica stepped in quickly. "Just improvements. You deserve a safer home. Daniel and I agreed that it is time to make a few adjustments." The word adjustments lingered between them. Evelyn remembered 3 weeks earlier when Jessica had mentioned how large the house felt for one person, how difficult stairs could become at a certain age. Daniel had nodded then, avoiding eye contact, saying something about convenience. Convenience. That word had begun appearing often in conversations lately. Daniel is not here, Evelyn observed. Jessica hesitated for half a second. He has an early meeting downtown. He asked me to handle this. Of course he had. Evelyn stepped down from the porch onto the driveway, her shoes firm against the concrete. She walked slowly toward the open van and glanced inside. The contractor shifted slightly as if to block her view, but she had already seen enough. A stack of file folders sat on top of one box. The top folder bore her last name typed neatly across the tab. Harper. Her name. Printed. Organized. Prepared. She turned back to Jessica. What exactly have you told these men? She asked quietly. Jessica exhaled through her nose, patience thinning. We explained that you were transitioning soon. It is nothing dramatic. Just planning ahead. Transitioning. Another carefully chosen word. Evelyn folded her hands in front of her coat. The air was still cool, but she no longer felt the chill. She felt clarity. Months of small remarks, gentle nudges, polite suggestions were forming a single line that pointed here, to this driveway, at this hour, with strangers ready to alter her home before sunrise. She looked directly at her daughter-in-law, her voice calm, steady, and unmistakably firm. No one transitions me anywhere without my consent, she said. The contractors remained silent. A bird began to chirp from a nearby tree as the first light of morning spread across the lawn. Jessica's expression flickered again, irritation replacing warmth. Evelyn, please do not make this difficult. We are only trying to help. Evelyn held her gaze. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply understood now that this was not about safety. It was about control, and someone had decided the decision had already been made for her. Jessica's composure began to thin as the silence stretched between them. She glanced toward the contractors as if hoping one of them would step in and smooth things over, but neither man spoke. They stood beside the open van with the cautious patience of people who had been hired to complete a job, not to mediate a family dispute. The morning light revealed more details now. The file folders were not random. They were organized, labeled, tabbed. Evelyn recognized the color of one binder. It matched the exact shade of the folder she kept in her study downstairs, the one containing copies of her insurance policies and the original deed to the house. What exactly is in those boxes? Evelyn asked quietly. Jessica inhaled, then answered in a measured voice. Just paperwork to make everything easier when the time comes. Daniel and I have been researching options. There is a lovely community about 12 miles from here. It has walking paths, organized activities, medical staff on site. You would not have to worry about maintenance anymore. The way she said maintenance made it sound like a burden Evelyn had already failed to carry. Evelyn looked at the front door of her home, the brass handle polished every spring, the porch light replaced just last month. The lawn had been trimmed 2 days ago. There was no visible decay. When exactly is this time you are referring to? She asked. Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line before she answered. Soon. We think it is better to be proactive. Proactive. That word again. Always careful, always neutral. Evelyn took a slow breath. She remembered the Sunday dinner in March, when Daniel had mentioned how hard it must be for her to climb the stairs. She had walked up those stairs twice a day for decades. She remembered the casual suggestion that perhaps it was time to simplify. Simplify. Reduce. Transition. Each word had been placed gently into conversation like a seed. Now those seeds stood in her driveway with clipboards and moving boxes. You told them I am transitioning, Evelyn said, her voice steady. Did you also tell them I agreed to it? Jessica hesitated. The contractor nearest the van shifted uncomfortably and looked at his watch. A car drove past at the end of the block, slowing briefly before continuing on. The neighborhood was waking up. Jessica lowered her voice slightly. We are your family. We are trying to plan responsibly. The house could be sold at a good price in this market. It makes sense. There it was. Not safety. Not concern. Price. Market. Value. Evelyn met her daughter-in-law's eyes and saw calculation where warmth should have been. So you have already spoken to someone about selling, she said, not accusing, simply stating. Jessica did not answer directly. It is important to think ahead, she replied. Evelyn nodded once, slowly, as if confirming a fact she had suspected for some time. She did not look angry. She did not look afraid. She looked as though she had just finished assembling the final piece of a puzzle. And in that quiet driveway, with the sun rising and strangers waiting for instructions, she understood that this had never been about helping her stay safe. It had always been about deciding what to do with her before asking whether she planned to go anywhere at all. The contractors began quietly closing the back doors of the van, sensing that whatever decision had been expected from this early visit was not arriving as planned. Jessica's patience thinned further as the street filled with the soft sounds of morning, sprinklers clicking on, a newspaper landing against a driveway, 2 houses down. Evelyn stood still for a moment longer, then stepped past her daughter-in-law and walked back toward the porch. She did not rush. She did not invite anyone inside. She opened the front door and paused at the threshold, turning slightly. "You should call Daniel," she said evenly. "If there is something he wishes to discuss, he can do so himself." Jessica's jaw tightened. "He trusted me to handle this." Evelyn gave a small nod. That was his first mistake. The words were not sharp. They were calm, almost reflective. Jessica folded her arms. "You are making this harder than it needs to be. We are thinking about your future." Evelyn looked at her carefully. "I have been thinking about my future for 72 years, she replied. "It has never required a moving truck before sunrise." The contractors shifted again, clearly eager to leave. One of them spoke softly, asking whether they should reschedule. Jessica did not answer immediately. Her eyes followed Evelyn as she stepped inside the house and left the door slightly open. Behind her, the foyer felt warmer than the driveway, familiar and steady. The framed photographs along the wall caught the new daylight. Daniel at age 8 holding a baseball glove that had been too big for his hands. Daniel at 18 standing on the front steps before leaving for college. Thomas beside her in every picture, his hand resting gently at her back. She did not touch the frames. She did not linger. She walked into the study at the end of the hall, the same room where bills had been paid and taxes filed for decades. The oak desk stood exactly where it had always stood. On its surface lay a leather folder that had not moved in months. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside were documents she had arranged 2 years earlier, quietly, without announcement. She had not done it out of suspicion. She had done it out of clarity. After Thomas passed, she had learned that love did not always guarantee alignment. She had watched Jessica's careful interest in property values, in square footage, in market trends. She had heard Daniel repeat phrases that did not sound like his own. Evelyn removed a single sheet of paper and read the heading again, confirming what she already knew. The house was protected. Legally. Thoughtfully. Not out of spite, but out of foresight. She closed the folder and returned to the foyer. Jessica was still outside, speaking in low tones to the contractors. The van engine started, then stopped again. They were waiting for direction. Evelyn stepped back onto the porch. The sun had fully crested the rooftops now, casting clear light across the lawn. "You may cancel their services," she said calmly. "There will be no changes made to this property." Jessica's expression shifted from frustration to something colder. "Daniel will not like this," she warned quietly. Evelyn met her gaze without flinching. "Daniel does not own this house," she replied. "And until I decide otherwise, no one will move me from it." The van doors shut firmly this time. The contractors climbed into the front seats without another word. As the vehicle pulled away, the sound faded down the block, leaving only the steady hum of a neighborhood fully awake. Jessica remained in the driveway, her plan interrupted, her timeline disrupted. Evelyn stood on her porch with both hands resting lightly on the railing, not trembling, not angry, simply certain. She had seen the direction of this path long before it reached her front door, and she had prepared for it in silence. Jessica did not argue further in the driveway. Instead, she gave a tight nod, walked to her car, and left without another word, the sound of her engine disappearing more quickly than the contractor's van had. Evelyn remained on the porch for a few seconds longer, watching the street return to its ordinary rhythm. A school bus passed at the end of the block. A jogger moved steadily along the sidewalk. The world had resumed as if nothing unusual had occurred, yet something fundamental had shifted. She stepped back inside and closed the door with deliberate calm. The lock clicked into place, solid and familiar. In the kitchen, sunlight streamed across the countertops, illuminating the ceramic bowl of fruit and the neatly folded dish towel beside the sink. Evelyn filled the kettle and placed it on the stove, her movements unhurried. She had learned long ago that decisions made in agitation often led to regret. As the water began to heat, she sat at the small kitchen table and allowed the quiet to settle around her. She thought about Daniel, about the boy who once asked permission before rearranging furniture in his own bedroom. She thought about how easily language could change when repeated often enough. Transition, simplify, market value. Those were not words he had used growing up. They had been introduced, gradually, until they sounded practical instead of intrusive. The kettle began to whistle softly, and she poured the water into her favorite blue mug. Steam rose between her and the morning light. On the counter lay her landline phone. She did not reach for it immediately. She knew Daniel would call once Jessica reported back. He would likely sound confused at first, then frustrated, perhaps even defensive. He would speak about concern and responsibility. He would say that they were trying to protect her. Evelyn lifted the mug and took a slow sip. Protection did not require secrecy. Care did not require contractors at dawn. After a few minutes, the phone rang exactly as she had anticipated. She let it ring twice before answering. Daniel's voice came through, tense but controlled. He asked why she had dismissed the men. He said Jessica had only been trying to help. Evelyn listened without interrupting, her eyes resting on the window above the sink. Outside, the maple leaves moved gently in the breeze. When he finished, she spoke calmly. She told him she would not tolerate decisions being made about her life without her consent. She told him the house was secure, both structurally and legally. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a pause that suggested he understood more than he wanted to admit. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply stated that if he wished to discuss her future, he could come alone that afternoon. There would be no vans, no contractors, no folders labeled in advance. After she hung up, Evelyn carried her mug into the study once more and placed it beside the leather folder on the desk. She rested her hand on it briefly, not out of fear, but out of reassurance. The morning had begun with someone else attempting to move her like a piece on a board. It had ended with her reminding them that she was still the one holding the game in place. Daniel arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon, earlier than he had promised, as if punctuality could soften the tension that had settled between them. He parked in the driveway without turning off the engine right away. Evelyn watched him through the front window from her usual chair in the living room. He looked older than she remembered from just a week ago. Not physically, but in posture. Shoulders slightly curved. Jaw tight. When he finally stepped out and walked toward the door, he did not knock immediately. He stood there for a moment, staring at the brass numbers beside the frame. The same numbers he had polished himself one summer when he was 12 years old. Evelyn opened the door before he could raise his hand. "Come in," she said calmly. He stepped inside, glancing around as if expecting something to be different. Nothing was. The same framed photographs. The same rug beneath his feet. The same faint scent of lemon polish that had always lingered in the hallway. He removed his jacket slowly. "Mom, we need to talk," he began, his voice careful. Evelyn nodded and gestured toward the dining table. They sat across from one another, sunlight stretching across the wood between them. He started with concern. He spoke about safety, about planning ahead, about how difficult it would be if something unexpected happened. He used the same words Jessica had used. Prepared, practical, responsible. Evelyn listened without interruption, her hands folded neatly in front of her. When he finished, she reached into the leather folder she had placed on the table before he arrived. She slid a single document toward him. He looked down, scanning the heading, his brow tightening as he read. The house had been placed into a protected trust 2 years earlier. The language was clear. It could not be sold, transferred, or leveraged without her written approval and an independent review. There were additional provisions as well. If any immediate family member attempted to coerce or pressure her into relocation for financial benefit, their future inheritance from the estate would be reconsidered entirely. Daniel read the page twice. His face drained of color not from shock, but from realization. "You did not tell me," he said quietly. Evelyn's voice remained steady. "I did not need to." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Jessica was just trying to organize things. Evelyn met his eyes. "Organizing is done with permission," she replied. Silence filled the room, thick but not explosive. He stared at the document again, then at the house around him. The walls held his childhood. The floors held his footsteps. He understood now that what had been framed as care had crossed into control. "You think we were trying to push you out," he said, almost to himself. Evelyn did not accuse. She did not dramatize. "I think you allowed someone else to decide what was convenient," she answered. The words settled between them. Not cruel, not loud, just honest. Daniel folded the document carefully and placed it back on the table. For the first time that day, he looked at her not as someone aging out of independence, but as the woman who had built and protected everything around him. And in that quiet afternoon light, he began to understand that the conversation was no longer about her future. It was about his choices. Daniel remained seated for several seconds after the words settled between them, his fingers resting on the edge of the dining table as though he needed something solid to hold on to. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the hardwood floor. He looked around the room. Again, slower this time, noticing details he had not paid attention to in years. The small scratch on the corner of the table where he had dropped a science project in middle school. The faint discoloration on the wall where a framed painting had once hung before being moved. This was not simply a property on a spreadsheet. It was a record of his entire life. "Jessica thought we were doing the responsible thing," he said quietly, though the certainty in his voice had faded. Evelyn did not interrupt him. She allowed the silence to work, the way she always had when he was younger and needed space to reach his own conclusions. "She kept saying we should not wait for a crisis," he continued. "She said you might not be thinking clearly about what comes next." Evelyn's expression did not change. "And you believe that," she replied, not accusing, simply observing. Daniel exhaled and leaned back in his chair. "I believed we were planning ahead. I did not think about how it looked." Evelyn folded her hands gently in her lap. "Planning ahead does not require secrecy," she said, "and it does not begin at 5 in the morning." He winced slightly at that, as if the image of the van and the contractors had only now fully registered. He ran a hand through his hair and stared at the document again. "You think she pushed this?" he asked carefully. Evelyn held his gaze. "I think someone was very eager to decide the timeline of my life," she answered. The words were steady, measured, impossible to dismiss. Daniel stood and walked slowly toward the living room window, looking out at the front yard. The grass had been cut in straight, even lines. The flower beds were trimmed. Nothing about the house suggested instability. "She talked about selling," he admitted after a moment. "She said the market is strong. She said we could invest the money wisely." Evelyn rose from her chair and joined him by the window, keeping a respectful distance. "Invest for whom?" she asked softly. He did not answer right away. That silence carried more truth than any explanation. Daniel turned back toward her, and for the first time since arriving, his voice carried uncertainty instead of defense. "I did not think it through," he said. "I let her handle it." Evelyn nodded once. "That is what concerns me," she replied. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily behind them. Outside, a breeze moved the branches of the maple tree, scattering light across the porch. Daniel looked at his mother as if seeing her differently, not fragile, not outdated, but deliberate and prepared. "What happens now?" he asked. Evelyn returned to the dining table and closed the leather folder carefully. "Now," she said calmly, "you decide whether you want to be part of my life as my son, or part of a plan that treats me like an obstacle." There was no anger in her voice, only clarity. Daniel swallowed and looked down at his hands. The choice had been placed where it belonged. Not in a moving truck, not in a real estate listing, but in his own conscience. And for the first time that day, he understood that the house was not the only thing at stake. Daniel did not answer immediately. He stood very still, as if the weight of the question required him to remain steady. The room felt different now, not tense in a dramatic way, but clear. The kind of clarity that arrives after something has been exposed to full light. He walked slowly back to the dining table and rested his hands on the back of the chair he had been sitting in earlier. "I never meant to treat you like an obstacle," he said quietly. Evelyn studied his face, searching not for apology, but for understanding. "Intent does not erase impact," she replied gently. He nodded, absorbing the truth of that. For years, he had balanced two worlds without examining the space between them. On one side was the woman who raised him, who paid off the mortgage one careful check at a time, who learned how to manage taxes and insurance policies after losing her husband. On the other side was the life he had built with Jessica, full of plans, investments, future projections. Somewhere along the way, those plans had begun to include decisions about someone who had not been consulted. Jessica thinks in terms of efficiency, he admitted. She sees numbers, equity, opportunity. Evelyn did not react with bitterness. And you? She asked calmly. What do you see? He hesitated. Then he looked around the room again, this time with intention. He saw the piano in the corner that his father had saved for over 2 years to purchase. He saw the worn armrest of the chair where his mother read every evening. He saw not square footage, but history. I see home, he said finally. The word landed with more honesty than anything he had said all afternoon. Evelyn gave a small nod. Then you understand why I will not be relocated like a file cabinet. There was no sarcasm in her tone, only firm resolve. Daniel exhaled slowly. Jessica will not be happy, he said. Evelyn's expression remained composed. Happiness built on control rarely lasts, she replied. He almost smiled at that, but the gravity of the moment kept him serious. He moved to the window once more and looked outside at the quiet street, now fully bathed in late afternoon sun. I need to speak to her, he said. Alone. Evelyn did not respond immediately. She returned to her chair and folded her hands in her lap. That would be wise, she said after a moment. Not to defend me, but to decide what kind of husband you intend to be. The statement was not an attack. It was an invitation to maturity. Daniel turned back toward her, absorbing the meaning. The issue was no longer a house, or a trust, or a market value. It was alignment. It was whether he would allow convenience to override conscience. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and paused at the doorway. You will not hear from contractors again, he said quietly. Evelyn met his eyes. I did not expect to, she answered. He stepped outside into the fading sunlight, closing the door behind him. Evelyn remained seated for a moment, listening to the steady rhythm of the clock on the mantel. The morning had begun with someone else attempting to schedule her future. The afternoon ended with her son reconsidering his own. And in the quiet that followed, she understood that the most important protection she had put in place was not legal. It was clarity. The house was quiet again by early evening. The light outside had softened into a pale gold that filtered through the curtains and rested gently across the living room floor. Evelyn remained seated for a while after Daniel left, not out of exhaustion, but reflection. The events of the day had unfolded without shouting, without spectacle, yet something irreversible had shifted. She rose slowly and walked through each room of the house, not inspecting, not guarding, simply present. In the kitchen, she straightened a stack of mail on the counter. In the hallway, she adjusted a picture frame that leaned slightly to the left. Each movement was deliberate, unhurried. This was not a space she was clinging to. It was a space she had built, maintained, and protected with intention. The phone rang once more just after 6 o'clock. She recognized Daniel's number immediately. This time his voice carried a different tone. Not defensive, not uncertain, steady. He told her he had spoken with Jessica. He did not share every detail, and she did not ask. He said the contractors would not return. He said there would be no more discussions about selling or relocating without her initiating them. He paused before adding that he had not realized how far the conversation had drifted from respect. Evelyn listened quietly. When he finished, she thanked him for calling. She did not lecture. She did not revisit the morning. She simply said she was glad he had chosen to think for himself. After she hung up, she carried her cup of tea to the front porch and sat in the wicker chair that had faced the street for decades. The air was cooler now, around 60 degrees, carrying the faint scent of cut grass. A few houses down, a child rode a bicycle in slow circles while a parent watched from the driveway. Ordinary life continued, untouched by the tension that had passed through her own. Evelyn rested her hands in her lap and allowed the evening to settle around her. She understood something clearly now. Protection was not about locks or alarm systems. It was about boundaries spoken calmly and upheld consistently. She had not needed to raise her voice to be heard. She had not needed to threaten to be respected. She had prepared quietly, acted deliberately, and trusted that clarity would speak louder than emotion. The maple leaves above her rustled gently in the breeze. The porch light clicked on automatically as dusk approached. Inside the house, the clock on the mantel continued its steady rhythm. Nothing had been removed. Nothing had been altered. And yet everything felt different. not because someone had tried to move her, but because she had reminded them that she was not movable. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Evelyn remained seated, calm and composed, knowing that the most important decision made that day had not been written on paper. It had been made in silence, when she chose to stand in her own doorway and remain exactly where she belonged.